that's a leap. Most of the time when we see clients, now not all the time, but most of the time when we see clients that have this 100% automated testing strategy, they are making the mistake of it's the only thing that needs to be done is there's things that can be done with my hammer. They're seeing the world through that. The tool is magical, and generally the testing is not aligned with company needs in those cases, or organizational needs, or project needs. And similarly, we see this with people who are pursuing 100% reactive testing techniques of exploratory testing or use of Whitaker's attacks or something like that. Now, I'm a big fan of these things in an appropriate blend, and but I don't think that reactive test techniques by themselves are typically the answer. Now, for every rule, there's an exception. We had a project that we did for a client just recently where indeed all we did was exploratory non-scripted testing. But this is exceptional, and we think long and hard about this before we decided that's the way to go. Generally, when we see test teams that we consider effective, they are using blended strategies and blended tactics. So they're using some degree of analytical risk-based testing mixed with some amount of reactive testing, mixed with some amount of automated testing, and maybe they've also got some model-based testing in there, and then maybe they've also got some methodical testing following checklists or defect taxonomies, those sort of things. They're basically trying to come at the testing problem with a lot of different strategies. So here's an example of blended versus straight. So we had a client that was using analytical strategy, analytical requirements-based initially, and then they said, okay, well, we're going to adopt some exploratory testing. We're going to put about 20% of the test execution effort into exploratory testing. We're going to do analytical risk-based testing, and their defect detection effectiveness, in other words, the percentage of defects that were found in testing prior to product being released to the field, jumped from 92% to 95%. Now you might say, well, that's not a big deal. It's only a 3% increase, but keep in mind that once your defect detection effectiveness is 90% or above, every percentage point increase above that is hard won. Particularly, you start to get to the 95% range. There's a whole lot of constraints and pressures that make it harder to push much above that. And we had another client using a similar blend, which had defect detection effectiveness of 94%, which has gone up as they continue to fine-tune their strategy. So don't think about testing strategies as religions, like you have to pick one and believe in one, and then that's the one true way. So for those of you who have run into this that concept floating around on the internet that there's you've got to fit into one kind of approach for testing or another, I think that's really very dangerous. I mean, I think that's starts to become the cult of the hammer, the cult of the saw, the cult of the screwdriver. You're completely obsessed with some particular strategy that you've come up with, and you lose sight of the fact that under certain circumstances, other strategies are appropriate. Okay. All right. Now, it is almost axiomatic amongst testers that, like Rodney Dangerfield, we get no respect. But is that always true? Well, certainly there are some testers and test teams that do feel like Rodney Dangerfield, and that they think, oh, people don't appreciate us and so forth. Now, why is that? Is that because they happen to be working in a company that is populated by sadistic developers and project managers who need someone around that they can disrespect and mistreat? Well, I guess if you're paranoid, you can believe that that's the reason for it. What we've seen is that this seems to be a result of not having a clearly defined mission with clearly defined success criteria that's well attached to things that the company values. If we can't actually say, okay, this is what we do, and this is what our target is, and this is why that's important to the organization. If you can't talk about those things crisply, we find is that people just don't really see the value of testing. It's just not clear. And testing, the thing with testing too is that testing as an activity by itself has no value. Is testing to the extent that it connects with other things the organization values going to give us value. So it's very important that we make that clear connection between what's our mission, what are we there to do, what are our success criteria, and when we've seen test teams that have done this effectively, and admittedly it's a hard thing to do, and not very many test teams have managed to do it, but for those test teams that have managed to do that, we see those test teams as valued by people across the organization. And part of it is not just defining this stuff, but reaching out to people to make sure that you're constantly looking to expand your list of stakeholders and expand the ways in which you can provide services to them. Okay, so here are some quotes from project stakeholders. These are not testers, about one test team that we looked at, a particularly effective test team when we did an assessment. What are some of the things they say? QA gives me an increased comfort level and confidence. So that's an interesting comment, because, okay, well, confidence. I'm looking for confidence. So if we want to give our stakeholders confidence, then we probably want to be thinking about coverage. And what percentage coverage do we achieve? And how do we measure that? We want to measure requirements coverage. We want to measure risk coverage. We want to measure code coverage. Maybe we want to measure all of them. We can give people a feel of that. See, this is what matters to this guy. So we need to do that. We need to connect to that. And the way that we can connect to that is by saying we want to cover a lot of the product. QA team provides broad knowledge that crosses organizational boundaries. Okay. So this gets us to the question of dealing with systems of systems. One of the problems that we have in a lot of big organizations, banks and insurance companies and other organizations that have large, complex data centers with a lot of different applications running in them, is that everybody seems to be off in their own silo, and they're stuck in their silo. They see and think about what's within their particular little applicational purview. The problem is that at some point or another, you have to do system integration testing. Now, you might be saying, no, that's not really true. We just do system testing and then we put it into production. Well, no, actually that is true. Either you as tester do system integration testing, or your customers and users do system integration testing, but somebody's going to make sure that all of these complex applications that are in the data center work together. And the only question is whether the defects associated with that will be found before or after the application goes into production. And keep in mind, once the applications go into production, they're now working on production data. And the scary risk of not doing system integration testing is that you are going to have some sort of shared data repository that is going to get hopelessly corrupted by two applications that didn't get tested together in system tests. So this item of the broad knowledge crossing organizational boundaries, this is where you really can emphasize, okay, we have a system integration team, and here are the different end-to-end tests that we've identified and that we perform. So that's our metric. What's the number of different kinds of end-to-end kinds of things that we've explored. Okay. QA and UAT testing period and process provide a central reference point coordinating the various projects. And now we're talking about the ability to have some clear, delineated handoffs, organizational handoffs that everybody understands. And we're talking about good reporting of results, clear status, and so forth here. We can ask people, hey, do you feel like you're getting the right information